If you're listening to this, I want you to imagine something. Imagine sitting across from someone who is 109 years old. Not in a hospital bed, not confused, not fading away, but sitting upright, clear-eyed, remembering names, stories, dates, even the little embarrassing things from 80 years ago. That's me. I'm 109, and I still know exactly who I am. And today, I want to tell you how I've avoided dementia. Because I've watched friends lose their memories. I've watched brilliant people forget their own children's names. And I decided a long time ago that if there was anything in my control, I was going to do it. So let's jump in. I'm going to tell you what I've done my whole life and what I refused to do. The first thing is this: I never retired from thinking. Now, I retired from work. That's different. I stopped going to an office, I stopped having a boss, but I never retired my brain. I've met people who say, I worked hard for 40 years, now I'm going to sit back and relax. And relaxing is fine, rest is good, but turning your brain off for 20 or 30 years? That's not rest, that's decay. Your brain is like a garden. If you don't plant something in it, weeds show up. I read every single day, sometimes history, sometimes biographies. I once spent an entire year reading about Abraham Lincoln and the decisions he had to make under pressure. Not because I needed the information, but because I wanted my brain to wrestle with something complex. I learned new things even at 80. I learned how to use a computer at 85. I learned email at 87. At 90, my grandson showed me how to look up old jazz records online. I didn't understand half of it at first, and that was the point. Confusion is not your enemy, it's your workout. The second thing I did was I protected my sleep like it was gold. Now, I didn't always get perfect sleep. I had children, I had stress, I had loss, but I respected sleep. I didn't brag about getting by on 4 hours. I didn't stay up until 2 a.m. watching nonsense just because I could. When you sleep, your brain cleans itself. That's not poetry, that's biology. Your brain literally clears out waste products at night. If you rob it of that time, you let the trash pile up. I went to bed at a regular time. I woke up at a regular time, even after retirement, especially after retirement. People think structure is for working people. No, structure is for healthy people. The fourth thing might surprise you. I guarded my stress. Now listen carefully. I didn't eliminate stress. That's impossible. I lived through the Great Depression. I lived through wars. I lost people I loved. Stress is part of life. But I refused to live in constant outrage. Today, I see people glued to bad news 24 hours a day, angry about politics, angry about neighbors, angry about strangers on the internet. I learned something simple. Chronic anger poisons the mind that carries it. When I was younger, I followed leaders like Winston Churchill during wartime. He faced enormous pressure, but even he understood the value of humor and measured response. You cannot live at full emotional volume all the time. I took walks when I was upset. I prayed. I talked things through. I did not marinate in bitterness. Because long-term stress shrinks your world, and it shrinks your brain. Number 4 is movement. I never became a gym fanatic. I never ran marathons, but I moved every single day. Walking, gardening, carrying groceries, fixing things around the house. Your brain is fed by blood, and blood moves when you move. I had a neighbor who retired at 62 and sat in a recliner for the next 25 years, television from morning until midnight. He used to say, "I've earned this." And maybe he had, but his body stiffened, his balance went, and eventually his memory followed. Motion is medicine. Even at 100, I was walking slowly down the street with a cane. Not fast, not far, but consistent. The fifth thing, and this one is deeply personal,
I stayed socially connected. Isolation is quiet. It creeps in politely. After retirement, after friends pass away, after driving becomes harder, you tell yourself you're fine. You say you like the quiet. But the brain needs conversation. It needs disagreement. It needs laughter. I played cards once a week for decades. I sat at tables where people teased me, challenged me, corrected me. That friction keeps you sharp. I remember when a local community center screened old films and we watched movies starring Charlie Chaplin. Afterwards, we argued about which scene was funniest. Those arguments did more for my brain than any crossword puzzle. Loneliness dulls the edges of your mind. Now, let me tell you something important. None of this guarantees anything. There are people who do everything right and still struggle. Biology plays a role. Genetics play a role. But many people surrender far too early. They say, well, dementia runs in my family, and then they stop trying. I never said that. I said, maybe it runs in my family, but it's going to have to catch me first. I also ate simply. Not perfectly, simply. Vegetables, fish, whole foods. I didn't drown myself in sugar every day. I didn't treat my body like a trash can. I enjoyed dessert, but dessert was dessert, not breakfast.
And here's another one that people don't talk about enough: purpose. When I turned 90, a friend of mine said, well, we're just waiting now. Waiting for what? I refused to wait for the end. At 92, I started mentoring young people in my neighborhood, not because I had all the answers, but because they needed someone to listen, and I needed someone to talk to. Your brain lights up when you are needed. If you wake up with no reason to engage, no one expecting you, no responsibility, even a small one, your mind begins to power down. Purpose is fuel. And let me say something gently. If you're in your 50s or 60s watching this, don't wait until you're 80 to start protecting your brain. The habits that build dementia don't start at 75. They start decades earlier. Heavy drinking, poor sleep, no movement, chronic stress, social withdrawal. You can't mistreat your brain for 40 years and expect it to sparkle at 90. Now, I'm not perfect. I've forgotten names. I've walked into rooms and forgotten why. That happens at every age. But I can still tell you stories from 1930. I can still balance my checkbook. I can still recognize every grandchild and great-grandchild. And I am grateful. In the next part, I'm going to share the mistakes I watched others make, the subtle ones that seemed harmless at the time, but that slowly stole their sharpness. And I'm going to tell you the one habit I almost ignored that might have made the biggest difference of all.
All right, let's keep going. I told you I'm 109, and I've had a long time to observe patterns. Not theories, not headlines, patterns. And one of the biggest mistakes I watched people make was this. They stopped challenging themselves because they were afraid of looking foolish. Now, that sounds small, but it's not. I had a friend in his late 70s who refused to learn how to use a smartphone. He'd say, "I'm too old for that," and everyone would laugh. It became part of his identity, the stubborn old guy who wouldn't adapt. But what was really happening? He was avoiding discomfort. When you stop putting yourself in situations where you might struggle, you stop growing. And when you stop growing, your brain starts shrinking. I embarrassed myself many times learning new things. I clicked the wrong buttons, I erased things I didn't mean to erase, I asked stupid questions. Good. That confusion kept my brain firing. The next mistake I saw was people narrowing their world too much. They stopped traveling, not necessarily across the ocean, but even across town. They stopped trying new restaurants, stopped meeting new people, ate the same food, watched the same shows, had the same conversations. Familiarity feels safe, but too much of it becomes mental confinement. I used to take different routes on my daily walks just to force my brain to pay attention. Different streets, different turns.
I'd notice new houses, new trees, new details. Novelty is like fertilizer for your neurons. Now, here's one that's harder to talk about: grief. I've buried friends. I've buried siblings. I buried my spouse. Grief can close you off. It can make you retreat. And if you retreat long enough, your brain follows your heart into isolation. After my wife passed, I wanted to disappear into my chair and stare at the wall. And for a few weeks I did. But I knew if I stayed there, I might not come back. So I forced myself, gently but firmly, back into the world. I joined a discussion group at the local library. We read books by people like Maya Angelou and talked about resilience and memory and identity. Those conversations cracked something open in me again. Pain isolates, but connection heals. Another subtle mistake I saw: multitasking constantly. Now, when I was young, if you read the newspaper, you read the newspaper. You weren't also scrolling, texting, watching, and half listening. Today, attention is fractured, and your brain adapts to how you use it. If you train it to skim, it forgets how to focus. If you train it to react, it forgets how to reflect. I practiced doing one thing at a time. When I ate, I ate. When I walked, I walked. When I read, I read. That depth strengthens memory. Let me tell you about something I almost ignored, and I'm glad I didn't. Hearing. Around 88, I started noticing I couldn't hear conversations as clearly in crowded rooms. I brushed it off at first. Pride, I suppose. I didn't want to admit I needed help. But hearing loss doesn't just affect your ears, it affects your brain. When you can't hear clearly, you withdraw. Conversations become exhausting, you participate less, and over time, social isolation creeps in again. So, I got hearing aids. And I'll tell you something, I felt 10 years younger the first week I wore them. I was back in the room, back in the jokes, back in the arguments. Protect your senses. Your brain depends on them. Now let's talk about food again. Not just what I ate, but how I ate. I ate with people whenever I could. Meals alone are quiet. Meals with others are stimulating. You tell stories, you react, you laugh. Your brain connects emotion to memory. I remember sitting at a long table when I was 95, arguing about old movies. Someone insisted that Casablanca was overrated. I nearly fell out of my chair defending it. That emotional engagement, that spark, strengthens recall. Emotion is glue for memory. Another thing I avoided was excessive alcohol.
Now, I enjoyed a drink now and then, but I never made it a daily escape. I watched people who drank heavily for years. Slowly, their sharpness dulled. Stories became repetitive. Details slipped away. Your brain is delicate. Treat it like something worth preserving. Here's something else that mattered more than I expected: posture and breathing. Sounds trivial, doesn't it? But shallow breathing reduces oxygen flow. Slumped posture compresses your lungs. Over decades, that matters. I practiced standing upright, taking full breaths, expanding my lungs when I walked. Oxygen feeds cognition. Now let me share something that might surprise you most of all. I forgave quickly. Resentment takes up space, mental space. If you replay old arguments for decades, you're rehearsing negativity instead of building new memories. I made mistakes. Others made mistakes. I tried to let them go, not because they didn't matter, but because I mattered, and I wanted my mind free. Let me also say this gently. Depression is not weakness, it's real, and it affects memory. If you feel persistently low, disconnected, hopeless, get help. Talk to someone. Don't let your brain sit in darkness for years. I had a period in my 70s where I felt adrift. I spoke with a counselor. It helped more than I expected. There's no medal for suffering in silence. Now I want to bring this all together. Avoiding dementia as best as you can isn't about one magic pill. It's about dozens of small, boring, consistent habits. Move your body.
Challenge your mind. Sleep well. Manage stress. Stay connected. Protect your hearing. Eat thoughtfully. Forgive. Have purpose. And above all, stay curious. Curiosity has been my greatest ally. At 100, I was still asking questions, still wondering how things worked, still amazed by new inventions. I even watched rocket launches and read about companies like SpaceX with genuine fascination. A mind that wanders stays alive. Now, I don't know how much time I have left. At 109, every morning is a gift. But I can tell you this, I did not drift into this age accidentally. I lived into it intentionally. And you can start today. Not next year, not when you retire, today. If this old voice has helped you even a little, then I've done my job. Take care of your mind. It's the only place you have to live for your entire life. Thank you for spending these moments with me. I'll see you in the next one.